My name is Ayumi Mishiro. I'm a 15-year-old Japanese American living in San Diego, California. I have jet black hair, and I'm about 5 foot, 3 inches tall. My family moved here from Japan around 10 years ago now, back when my father was a younger man. He's a localizer for a big-name video game company, and the higher-ups wanted him to be closer to the people he technically works with in America. I was pretty young when we moved. I don't really remember Japan that much aside from when we travel back to visit my grandparents. Shortly after moving, my parents adopted a little girl. She's half Japanese, half Caucasian. The orphanage said her name was Satori, and she's a year younger than me. The only real way you can tell she's any bit of Caucasian is her light brown hair. My parents took her in, as they had long wanted another child. But my birth was a complicated one, and the doctors said that after I was born, my mother would probably not survive another pregnancy. She had been given a vasectomy shortly after I was born. When my parents visited the orphanage, they had fallen in love with the, at that point, 5-year-old girl who stared up innocently from the playground. Over the years it became nearly impossible to tell if Satori was even adopted. She was such an important and joyous part of the family. As for my part, it didn't take me long to think of Satori as my sister. We bonded from day one, and soon we started acting just like normal siblings would. Teasing each other, playing together, and in a lot of ways we became best friends. Being as young as she was when she was adopted, Satori didn't have many memories of the incident. My parents explained it to her when she was 10, and I was the one to console her and help her understand that it didn't matter. We were a family, no matter who her biological parents were. I don't really know when it happened, but it was obviously after she discovered that she was adopted. Over time, Satori and my relationship changed. Part of it was simply due to children growing up, another part of it was Satori's newfound understanding of the fact that she wasn't related to me through blood. I never really stopped thinking of her as my sister, so I never fully understood what was going on in her mind when I caught her staring at me from time to time. I guess it should have been obvious, but teenage boys aren't really the most knowledgeable people about girls, and even less so towards their sisters. Satori had an ever-growing crush on me. She had a lot of guy friends at school, of course. And a few of them were a lot better looking than I was. It wasn't about the looks, it was the intimacy. Satori and I had shared a bed on many occasions. Nothing romantic, of course, she's my sister. But when she was younger, during big storms or when she had nightmares, she'd come to my room and I'd be the one to console her. There was a huge bond between us, and in her mind that bond changed when she discovered the truth of her introduction to the family. When we became teenagers, our roles towards each other started reversing. Girls mature faster than boys, and it is needless to say that they are more confident with themselves during adolescence. As we got older, Satori became more of my protector than the other way around. My confidence began diminishing with my rapidly changing body, coupled with the fact that I wasn't the most popular in my class. I oftentimes found myself confiding my fears with her, and she happily listened and offered advice. And as comforting as it was to have her there for me, I also felt slightly ashamed that I was running to my sister for a shoulder to cry on. It was emasculating, but I didn't really understand it at the time. Of course, it didn't really take long for me to realize that Satori's feelings for me were more than sisterly. Or even that of a friend. When I was 14, she was 13, I finally confronted her. She blushingly told me that she liked me, as teenagers describe it. I was flabbergasted. I honestly didn't know how to react, other than to tell her that she was my sister, and I loved her as one. I expected her to become upset, but that was never how Satori reacted to anything. She's the freest-spirited person I know, and never lets anything get her down. It was always something I admired about her. Another thing about Satori is that she always seems to get her way. She just has a knack for that, whether it be through manipulation or honest work, she can get what she wants. She doesn't really understand what the word no means, I sometimes joke, because she can always turn the situation in her favor. She wasn't afraid to do what was necessary to reach her goals. Her goals were always admirable, at least, and so it was a very good quality to have. In retrospect, I probably should have thought about that when I witnessed her cheery reaction to my polite dismissal of her affection to me. Now that you know more about us, I have a heck of a story to tell you. As I said, Satori and I weren't related by blood. The only connection that existed between us was the one that we had forged ourselves. And it was strong. I assume that's where the abilities came from. We were connected at a deep level, we understood each other. I don't know if the abilities are symbolic of anything, but they are amazing. For me, it all started at school one summer day. I was a sophomore at a public school in San Diego, and was sitting in my fourth period English class. It was sweltering in there. My English teacher refuses to throw a window open for any reason, or run the air conditioner. To make matters worse, my school requires uniforms, and the polyester shirts are torture on days like that. Every student in the room was beading sweat and most certainly not paying attention to the lecture. I was leaned forward on my desk, my chin resting on my folded hands, when I felt a strange itching sensation on my chest. I absent-mindedly scratched, and the itch died away for a while, but it returned fiercer a moment later. I sat up and gave a good scratch, and this time, I felt something odd. I don't have a very muscular body, but I am very lean and fit. So when my fingers pushed into the soft, large things on my chest, I nearly screamed. I looked down and saw large bumps on my chest, as well as it felt like another layer under my shirt. My mind reeled and I quickly glanced around to see if anyone else had noticed it. For the first time in my life, I was glad that I wasn't very popular. No one was paying me the slightest attention as they were all too busy trying to deal with the heat of the room. I looked back down at the breasts and discovered that they were gone. My chest was back to normal. I stared at my shirt for a bit. Was it a hallucination? I asked myself. Did the heat make me imagine that? If so, what a strange hallucination. After a while, I forgot about the incident. I managed to convince myself that it was a trick of the mind or something. I went about the rest of my day, and by the time the final bell rang, the last thing on my mind were the imaginary breasts on my chest. I rode a bike to school, so I was able to take my time leaving, unlike the other kids who had to catch buses. I went to the bathroom to relieve myself before the ride home. The urinals were all taken, and in retrospect, that was a very lucky coincidence for me. I went into a stall and closed the door. It was right afterwards that I started feeling really strange, my body itching all over. I gasped as I started changing. The first noticeable thing was my height. I began shrinking considerably, until I was less than 5 feet tall. Exactly how far under, I wasn't sure, but I felt tiny. I felt my pants grow tighter along my butt and thighs, but looser in my waist and calves. My shirt was similar, it was ridiculously huge along my stomach, neck and arms, but I was nearly bursting the buttons off of my polo. It was painful, and I instinctively loosened 2 buttons to allow some relief. It was then that I noticed the cleavage, which meant I had breasts. I started breathing heavily as I stared at them. Realizing I was in a public bathroom, I silenced myself and listened intently, but I appeared to be alone now. All of the other kids had departed, anxious to leave the school, I supposed. I whirled around to leave the stall, and as I did, I felt a something whip across my face and tangle itself in front of my eyes. I reached up and brushed it away, and realized it was raven-colored hair, soft and long. And it was attached to my head. I ran for the mirrors, and saw a beautiful teenage girl wearing an oversized boy's uniform staring back at me. If you had seen her, you would have thought that she was related to me. I thought that if I had a biological sister, she would probably look similar. Then the realization that this girl was me hit and I felt myself going faint. I need to get home, I said absent-mindedly, noticing my soft musical voice as I did so. I started walking towards the exit when I noticed a new change. My pants suddenly felt funny, and I could feel a draft in my legs. I looked down and saw that the legs of my pants had fused together. It now looked like I was wearing a strange gown. Slowly they crawled up my legs, exposing more of my feminine legs, until they reached just under the knees. I noticed that my legs were very shapely and were shaved as well. The pants then changed color to plaid, green being the dominant color. My mind snapped as I realized it was the skirt of the girls' school uniform. I couldn't stay in the men's bathroom like this, I knew, but I didn't want to be seen if any more changes occurred. I did the only sensible thing I could think of. I ran for the women's bathroom. Hiding in a stall, I felt a certain fear. If what was happening to me was real, then I had nothing to be afraid of. A girl had no reason to worry about being in the women's bathroom. But what if I was hallucinating, and I wasn't actually changing into this beauty? Then I'd be in a lot of trouble. I felt a tightness in my calves suddenly, and my thoughts were distracted as I watched my socks crawl up my legs, stopping just under the hem of my skirt. My shoes then changed to black Mary Janes with one strap. They fit perfectly, and it made me sick because in my mind there was nothing really more feminine than Mary Jane shoes. I would think differently in the next few months, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. My shirt was undergoing a similar transformation. It was changing from the coarse polyester to a sheer material that felt amazingly better on my new body. It tightened around my waist and arms, and I could finally see my figure. Before I had even a chance to admire it, though, a dark blue vest covered up the shirt, which I knew was now called a blouse, and my standard red necktie crawled up and changed into a bright red bow. I felt a tugging at my hair, and it was suddenly out of my eyes. I knew it was all still there, but it was all pulled behind my head. I don't know how I knew it then, but I just did. The transformation was complete. I looked at my hand, and with a bit of a shock, saw a fashionable-looking purse clutching it. Inside were all of my personal things, but they were all changed to represent the woman who I must now be. My phone still had all of my contacts, but it was pink instead of blue. I warily exited the stall and looked into the mirror. A very pretty schoolgirl, her dark hair tied back into a ponytail, stared back at me. I must have stared at myself for 5 minutes before realizing the time. I need to go home. I thought wildly, but I can't let anyone see me like this. Especially not my parents. How am I going to tell them that I turned into a girl? I began walking towards the school's entrance, where my bike was. Along the way, my heart skipped a beat as I came face to face with Chet Riley, the school bully. He had a habit of waiting for me after school hours to pick on me. He saw me approaching and came up to me. "Hi," he said as he stood in front of me. "Hey Chet," I replied warily. "Hey, how do you know my name?" he asked. "Have we met before?" "Oh," I said in surprise. My fear of Chet had made me forget what I currently looked like. "No, we haven't. One of my friends told me who you were." I see, Chet said with a smile. What's your name? Are you new here? Yeah, I'm new, I said, blushing with embarrassment. I wanted to get out of here, and I couldn't think of a name. Well, new girl, Chet said playfully, and with a start I realized he was flirting with me. I felt sick at the thought. Do you have a name? Midori Yakamoto, I replied. It was the name of a character in a manga that I liked to read. Though the character was very popular, I highly doubted Chet would know who she was. He was a thug, and could hardly read. If he did read comics, I bet he only looked at the pictures. I wasn't disappointed. Midori, he replied, what a pretty name. I don't know why I blushed at that comment, but I suppose it was the female hormones in me. Say, if you need any help around here, getting settled in and stuff, just look me up. I'd be happy to help you. Here's my phone number, okay? I was shocked as I took his number down into my phone, but if it meant getting away from him, then it was worth it. He kissed my hand, more blushing, and then departed. Riding a bike is very different when you're wearing a skirt. It took me a while to get home, because I had to keep adjusting myself to get comfortable. I finally made it. I was extremely relieved to see neither Mom's nor Dad's cars in the garage. They were still at work. Satori's bike was here, though, so I knew she had been home. It was actually relieving. Satori would help me figure this out, I thought. I ran inside and up to her room, knocking twice. Ayumi, is that you? She asked. I replied, not wanting to give myself away with my voice just yet. Come in, bro, she replied. I tentatively opened the door and stepped inside. She was on her computer and didn't watch me come in. I closed the door and sat demurely on her bed, not even realizing the feminine way that I was presenting myself. What's up? She asked, turning around. When she saw me, a shocked look appeared on her face. Who are you? She asked. She didn't seem frightened, thank God. Please, Satori, I started, and I could feel tears welling up in my eyes as I did. You have to believe me. It's me, Ayumi. I was just leaving school, and I was transformed into this girl. I don't understand it, but I promise it's really me. She stared at me a bit, before smiling. I believe you, she said. I can tell it's really you by the look in your eyes. It's exactly the same look you get when you're scared. Relief washed over me and I ran up and hugged her and began sobbing into her shoulder. How did this happen? I asked, not really expecting an answer. I think, Satori said, with excitement in her voice, I think I did it. I pulled back from her. What? I asked. Well, it's just, I was thinking about a style earlier, she said. I wondered how it would look, I wished that I had some way to model it, and now here you are dressed exactly the way I wanted it to look. I think maybe I changed you. You're wearing everything I imagined, your hair's as long, and the ponytail scrunchie is even the same. Try changing me back. I said, relieved to have found the source of the problem. All right, let me think here. She closed her eyes and scrunched up her face. I immediately felt the itching, and I started to grow larger. My girlish clothes were changing with my body this time, however, and the transformation was much faster. I was back to my old self. Thank you. I said, hugging her. Oh God, I was so worried that I was going crazy. Satori smiled, and suddenly I felt myself shrinking again. The transformation went as fast this time as when I changed back to normal. In mere minutes I found myself a girl again, wearing the school's athletic wear. Really small shorts that allowed the girls freedom of movement and a tight tank top. I could feel the tightness of a sports bra. My hair was once again long and tied back into a ponytail. What? I screamed as I looked at myself in the mirror. Gah, change me back. How are you doing this? I don't really know, Satori answered with a laugh. I just think about it and I can change you. Watch. I watched in the mirror as my hair shortened, and this time even changed color. I grew slightly until I was just as tall as Satori, and I realized my hair was styled just like hers. My entire body and clothes changed until I was the spitting image of Satori. We're twins, she said gleefully. I wasn't quite as amused as she was. Change me back, I said angrily. It was weird hearing her voice coming from my mouth, or sounding that angry. No, she said with an innocent smile, I want to keep testing it. Come on, this is like magic. I have a magic power. I wish you could see what it's like, I said with a grumble. Suddenly Satori started growing. Her budding female figure started vanishing. Her hair shortened slightly and took on the form of a boy's haircut. Her skirt grew out into a pair of jeans and her blouse turned into a t-shirt. She was wearing a pair of thick black sneakers. He stared at himself in the mirror with awe. I couldn't take my eyes off him. You have the power too, she said with joy. She reached over and embraced me, jumping up and down. I felt immensely strange. My little sister was now my considerably bigger brother, and he was holding me in very strong arms. I felt helpless. Satori! I screamed, let me go. Sorry, little sister, he said, dropping me. I landed on the bed. I suddenly felt myself changing back, and was immensely relieved. But as I looked in the mirror, I didn't see myself, I saw the same schoolgirl who I had been when I had arrived home. Satori! I said, glaring at her. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw she was smiling very strangely at me. Ayumi, you're really pretty like that, she said. As she said it, I felt the same way that I had felt when Chet had said it back at school, but the feeling was stronger this time. I felt so embarrassed, and a hint of something else. Satori, I said softly, my cheeks burning, please change me back now. In a second, she said, sitting down next to me. She grabbed my hand and held it there, and I felt weird. Safe. I didn't know how to describe it, but it was scary how calm I was. Suddenly she started leaning into me, and I quickly desired for her to change back. When she kissed me on the cheek, it was her normal girl self that did so. Oh geez, she said, I'm so sorry, Ayumi. I could tell she honestly meant it. Satori wasn't a liar. Being a boy is weird. I'll be more careful from now on. From now on? I asked, I want you to change me back, and then we're never going to do this again. Satori smiled, now brother, she said, and I was happy that she had at least called me brother. I don't know how or why we can do this, but it's a gift. And even if we can't think of anything better to do with it than have fun, there's nothing wrong with that. I don't like being changed into a girl, I said. Why not? She asked with a smile. I don't know, boys don't want to be girls. That's all. It was the best answer I could give. Well, I like being turned into a boy, she replied. So, would you do it when I want you to? Fine, I said, just change me back now. I said, before Mom and Dad get home. Should we tell them about it? Satori asked. No, I said, and I noticed my voice was back to normal as I did. I looked down to see that she had already changed me back. Who knows what they'd think about this? We should keep it a secret. All right, she said, I'll keep it a secret if you let me change you into a girl when we're alone together. What? He said, no, I don't want to be a girl. Well, let's see here, she said, try to resist it. Suddenly I felt myself changing again. This time back into the athletic uniform. I tried with all my power to stop it from happening, but it didn't work. So I can change you whether you like it or not, she said, grinning. I suppose it's the same for you changing me. So here's my proposal. I promise you that I won't change you against your will, if you promise to change me and let me change you when we're alone. I tried thinking of a way out of it, but I had dark thoughts about being in the middle of a class and suddenly changing into a beautiful athlete girl. Fine, I said. It's a deal. Yay! She screamed. My parents arrived home, their presence announced by the shutting of the front door. Satori quickly changed me back and we acted like nothing had happened in the presence of our parents. Over the next couple of months, we began exploring our powers. We could make each other wear any clothing we could think of, much to my embarrassment at times, so long as it fit the gender we were transforming ourselves into. The clothes would always change back, though, even if we removed them before turning each other back. We couldn't really affect each other's minds. I would act girly and feminine, but she couldn't control me beyond that. The same applied to her masculinity. I did find, however, that I would gain an understanding of certain things. It was a funny story. I came down for breakfast that morning. It was Saturday, which meant no school. Normally that would have been exciting for me, but ever since we discovered our abilities it was a bit dreadful. Our parents both worked on Saturday, so every Saturday was free game for transformations, as we were alone in the house. Sometimes Satori only wanted to be changed into a boy, other times she wanted me to model for her. As I poured myself some cereal, I hoped that wasn't the case today. Satori came downstairs, and by the look on her face I knew she was already planning what she wanted. Hey bro, she said happily as she pulled out a chair next to me. Good morning, I replied, my mouth half full of cereal. It's your week to do chores, she said. I groaned a bit. I did chores around the house every other Saturday, and Satori did them accordingly when it was her turn. So I don't want to bother you too much. I'm going to the arcade, and I was wondering if you'd change me before I do. Why do you need to? I asked, why can't you just go to the arcade as a girl? I get stared at, she said, smiling, not that I really mind, but I like to be able to enjoy myself without a bunch of geeky guys' eyes glued to me. All right, I said, feeling a little protective of her. He thought about her becoming a regular teenage boy. Not too muscular, she said as she started growing, I don't want to look out of place. Maybe I should turn you into a fat nerd, I said jokingly. It didn't faze her, because she didn't judge people by their looks. If that's what you want to do, she said. She knew I wouldn't. I was too nice. Not to mention, if I did something like that, she'd have an equally suitable punishment for me once I was finished. Well, there you go, I said. Staring back at me was my, now, brother. He was about as tall as me, lean and fit, wearing jeans and a Ninja Turtles t-shirt. He looked like a boy version of Satori, but only a little bit. Satori walked over to the mirror and admired himself for a bit. "Good work, brother," Satori said, "you're getting good at this." I mumbled a thank you to her, my attention back to my cereal. "I suppose I should thank you, somehow." I looked up quickly and said, No, that's okay, Satori." "Nonsense," Satori said with a smile. "Now let's see here, I know just the thing." The changes started, and once they did, I knew they were inevitable and stopped protesting. I felt myself shrink down to the usual size. I felt my pajama bottoms fuse together, transforming into a rather thick skirt. My shirt fused with the pants, and I realized that she was making me a dress. The sleeves poofed out, looking like small black pumpkins, and a line of white lace adorned the sleeves, which ended at the shoulders. White satiny gloves appeared on my hands. My shoes turned sheer black and grew small heels. A white, lacy apron appeared on my front and tied itself around my middle, greatly accenting my curves. My hair curled and formed into an elegant bun, and I felt something resting like a crown on my head. It was a maid's cap. I looked into the mirror to see a maid standing there staring at me, pretty as a doll. "There you go," he said, "now you're ready to do your chores." "Ugh," I grumbled disdainfully. "I'm ready to leave now," Satori said with a grin. "Oh," I said, my body going into autopilot. As I said previously, we don't have the power to control each other. But when we get transformed into specific people or roles, we act accordingly. As a maid, I was compelled to act like a maid. A week ago she had turned me into a goth girl. I couldn't believe the words that came out of my mouth. It was scary. But she couldn't specifically command me to do anything, nor influence my behavior to her own whims. I walked elegantly up to her and knelt on the floor, grabbing her shoes and placing them on the ground before her. I stood up and folded my hands on my apron as she departed. "Goodbye, master," I said, hating myself for it. "See you later, sister." After she had shut the door, I turned around and began cleaning up my cereal. As I was dressed as the maid, I was compelled to finish all of my chores before I relaxed. It was Satori's way of making sure I did all of my chores right. I washed the dishes, swept the kitchen and dining room, and vacuumed the living room. After that, I went upstairs and tidied up my bedroom. I was shocked as I felt myself go to Satori's bedroom and clean that as well, but I suppose I was the maid of the household. I'd get her back next week for this, I figured as I put away her clean laundry. Finally, I finished. I went to my room and sat on the bed. I had been transformed many times by that point, but always in the presence of Satori. I had never had a chance to explore my femininity. But now I was all alone, and as I sat on the bed, the curiosity got the better of me. I had wondered ever since the first transformation what I looked like without the clothes on. I had gone to the bathroom on 2 occasions, but Satori was present and would have known if I had done anything. Using the toilet was weird as a girl, and I had tried to avoid that as much as possible. As I started looking down my shirt, I was surprised to see that they had transformed back into my pajamas. I looked all over and noticed that my whole body was normal again. Satori had set a limit on the transformation, I thought with a grumble, until I finished my chores. But I didn't mind as I didn't have the impulses of a girl to get in the way of enjoying my video game anymore. And that was how it went. Our roles were defined by this point. I was her doll, when it was convenient for both of us. And I'd be lying if I told you that I didn't get used to it after a while. It always felt weird to be a girl, but I started getting the hang of it. As a girl, I could walk in heels, and I was always asked by Satori to twirl for her when I wore a dress or skirt. She delighted in putting me into all sorts of different costumes: cheerleading, volleyball, swimming, business women. As time went on, I started getting a thrill from it. I was enjoying it, though I'd never admit it, even to Satori. All the while, Satori and I grew closer. This special bond we had with each other was obviously designed to help us become better friends, as we could only change each other. Things were going smoothly. It had settled into a routine, as a matter of fact. Every once in a while Satori would put me into something that was too embarrassing, but I was now used to all sorts of skirts, even female underwear. But one day, something went wrong. I was on the subway when it happened. I had gone across town to the zoo for a school report and was on my way home. It was in during the rush, and there was nowhere to sit, so I was forced to stand amidst around 20 people. I was going over my notes from the field trip in my head when I suddenly felt the familiar sensations of the transformation. My body tensed up in fear. Not here, I thought desperately, looking around. A lot of people were half asleep, a few were, and there were a few people with headphones in, listening to music or on their computers. Nobody was actually paying me any attention, but I assumed they probably would notice when a boy turned into a girl right in front of them. The changes started, and they were much different than before. I didn't shrink as much as I normally did, that much was apparent. I looked down to realize that it wasn't so much that I hadn't shrunk properly, but that I was wearing very high heels, which were glossy white with a white rose sewn on the front. I felt my hair grow out, and my chest push out, and in a matter of moments, I was a girl. I looked around and saw to my dread, a few faces staring intently at me. Luckily, I hadn't been facing them when the transformation started, so they didn't get a glimpse of who I really was. But my torture was only beginning. I then felt my shirt changing. My short sleeves snaked their way up my arm until they covered even my fingertips. The sleeves tightened and grew soft and satiny as they did. I realized the sleeves had changed into shoulder-length gloves. My shoulders felt strange, and I could see what actually remained of my sleeves ballooning out, looking like pumpkins. My neckline plunged very deep, exposing just the top of my breasts. A trim of lace went along the neckline as well. A large embroidered design of lace appeared on the chest of my shirt, and the whole of my shirt changed from polyester to satin. It felt so smooth. If I hadn't been in such a dire situation, I would have enjoyed it. I felt something rustle against my back. Reaching around, I felt a large ribbon tied in a bow. The changes were so slow compared to how they normally were. Usually the female garments would pop into place, but this time my clothes were slowly melting into whatever it was I was changing into. I realized the reason immediately. Satori didn't realize she was doing it. I reached for my pocket, where my cell phone resided, only to discover that my pants had begun changing as well. My pockets had disappeared, along with everything inside of them. I knew they would reappear once I changed back, but now I was unable to call Satori to make her stop the change. My pants were changing, but my attention was on my socks. I could feel them creeping up my legs, and they were very tight as they did. I didn't have to look, Satori had already put me in nylons before, I knew what they felt like. But they continued up my legs to my panties. I felt a pinch of cold on both legs, and I realized there was metal there. A garter belt? I had worn one before, but this was getting ridiculous. My pants had changed from plaid to white, and were fusing together. But they grew out, forming not a skirt, but a dress. Once the dress had formed, it turned into the same satiny material as the shirt had. The design along the middle of the dress was similar to the lacy design of what used to be my shirt, which had now fused with the pants. I realized in horror what I was turning into. I was becoming a bride. I looked around in horror. Every eye was now on me. Open-mouthed and rubbing their eyes, the people were obviously bewildered at the beauty blossoming in front of them. There was no escaping it either, as the train was still en route. I could only stand there in horror as the changes continued. The dress was not content, and continued expanding until it trailed all around me. There were multiple skirts, petticoats, and it was heavier than I imagined it would be. I felt my hair moving. It twisted around and formed an elegant stylish bun, a part hanging loose along my left shoulder, fastened with a white ribbon. I felt my eyes become heave and could suddenly see my eyelashes. I had mascara on? She could give me makeup? That had never happened before. I felt a similar process on my lips and knew I now had lipstick as well. My whole face was probably made up. A cold weight appeared around my neck, and my gloved hands found a pearl necklace. My ears were suddenly weighed down with matching earrings. My right hand suddenly felt strange, as if it were holding something. I looked down and saw a bouquet of white roses. The final touch was a veil, which fell down from the sky and framed my face. I could only stand there, every bump threatening to knock me off of my feet. I wasn't used to such high heels. People were staring open-mouthed at me. And then the thing I dreaded happened. I noticed someone was taking a picture of me. I glanced around and saw multiple people with phones, iPods, and even a man with his computer facing me recording my transformation with a webcam. I turned beet red and had to force myself not to cry. Not because I'd have been ashamed to, but a bride doesn't want to ruin her makeup and my autopilot was making me be careful about it. After what seemed like forever, the train reached the station. I was so relieved, but now I was faced with a new challenge. Moving. I tried lifting up the skirts, but there were so many that I couldn't grab them all. I had to take small dainty steps, and the trail of skirts behind me was infuriating as it kept snagging on people's shoes. Luckily, they were all still too flabbergasted, and were content to watch me leave. As I passed a mother and her daughter, they stood up and grabbed the trailing skirt. We don't want it to get ruined," she said. "Thank you," I managed to say. My voice was angelic. They helped me get off the train, and through the station. I received plenty of stares as I went along, but it wasn't so out of place. Many people probably thought it was a publicity stunt of some kind. I hailed a taxi, and the woman helping me carry the dress gave me some cash for the ride. Her daughter reached up and hugged me before I got into the cab and said, "When I grow up, I hope I'm as beautiful as you are." "Oh," I said, and I felt strangely proud of the statement. Children are very honest people, at least when they're talking to people they don't know, and it was a high compliment as far as I was concerned. "Thank you, I'm sure you will be." I gave her a peck on the cheek before taking off. The taxi took me home, and I was terrified that my parents would be there. There was no way I'd get through the house without them seeing me. Luckily they weren't. I went inside, and as I did, I felt a strange mixture of relief and excitement. Being transformed in public was terrifying, but now that it was over with, I found it exhilarating. I wouldn't want it to happen again or anything, but the fact that nobody actually recognized me had been a huge relief, and now that the ordeal was finished, I had to admit it wasn't as bad as I thought it would have been. On the other hand, I thought as I went to Satori's room, it had been a very close call, and I was lucky. I didn't bother knocking on her door, and went in. She was changing and was only in her underwear, but I didn't care. I was currently a bride. Why should I be worried about seeing my stepsister in her underwear? A you me? Satori shrieked as she saw me. Is that you? Yes, I replied exasperatedly. You changed me into a bride. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Satori said, but she was smiling. I'm sorry, I really am, but you look so beautiful. She ran over and gave me a hug. I didn't mean to do this. Her voice was muffled through the dress. I know you didn't, I said. Can you change me back? I was looking over a bridal catalog that Mom got in the mail, and I was thinking about changing you into this dress later. Satori was poking all over the dress as she explained the situation. I didn't think it would change you, especially not when you were so far away. That's fine, I said. A bunch of people saw me change, she gasped as I continued, but they never saw me as a boy, so all they saw was a girl turning into a bride rather than a boy turning into one. So they'll never know it was me. It was really scary at first, because I thought they were all going to stop me and ask me a million questions, or maybe take me to the police. But I got home, and now you can change me back. I expect there will be videos and pictures on the internet by now. Oh really? She asked, noticing the lack of stress in my voice. You don't seem very upset. I have to admit, I said, blushing as I did so, it was pretty fun after I knew I was safe. Before I change you back, she said, will you do me a favor? What's that? I asked. Change me into a groom, she said excitedly. I stared at her confusedly. Why? I want a picture of the two of us in matching costumes. I won't show it to anyone, I promise. She said. Fine, I said. Satori looked gleeful as she turned into her boy self. She was wearing a white tuxedo that matched my dress and design. I was surprised with it, as normally the clothing I gave her was pretty bland. I didn't have much sense for fashion or matching things like this. Wow, she said in her deep voice. I realized that I really liked hearing it for some reason. You did a good job. I didn't even mean for it to be that elaborate, I answered, not able to meet her eyes as I did so. I could feel her eyes on me, but didn't look up. I'll set up the camera, she said, and her voice was gentle. I found myself drawn to it, to her. I was both scared to continue with this and entranced by my sister, the groom. And then I realized why. I was a bride, she was the groom. My autopilot was acting accordingly. But as I watched her set up the camera, I wasn't too sure if it was the autopilot or not. The timer's set to go off in half a minute, she said as she approached me. It'll take 3 pictures, each a half a minute after the last. She grabbed my arm, and my stomach did flips as she held it. We faced the camera and I couldn't help but lean into her a bit. My smile was completely natural as the flash went off. The second picture, she had picked me up, and I had trouble remembering why this might not have been a good idea as she supported me in her strong arms. As we positioned for the third picture, we were holding hands, facing each other. Each second seemed to last an hour, and I wondered if she was feeling the same way I was. At the last second, before the picture went off, I gave up fighting against it and wrapped my arms around her neck and pulled her into a kiss. I felt a sharp shock pass through me as I did, like static electricity. The kiss lasted a lot longer after the picture ended. When we finally broke apart, the realization of what I did hit me, but not entirely like I thought it would. I was very conflicted. A part of me realized I had kissed Satori, and another part felt that it was the right thing to do. She was staring at me, a mixture of happiness and shock. "Let's change back," she suggested, gently pushing me back. I felt a serious feeling of loss as my hands left hers. I looked down and saw myself in my school clothes. I changed Satori back to normal, and here was where things were weird. I still had feelings beyond friendship for her, but something was wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it felt wrong to be with her, even though I knew it was what I wanted. What was wrong with me? She was looking at the pictures. "Here, Ayumi. Take a look at how beautiful you look." She handed me the camera, and I couldn't help but be awed when I saw it. Nobody would have guessed our true identities, of course, but the girl was stunning. I hadn't gotten a chance to look in the mirror since I had changed into the bride. I flipped to the second picture, and saw a look of adoration on my own female face, which wasn't facing the camera, but instead was facing Satori. And the last picture sent shivers down my spine that I did not associate with fear. She grabbed my hand, and I was happy she did, but something still felt wrong. I pulled away, feeling bad about doing so. "I'm sorry, Satori," I said. I need some time to think about this." She only smiled at me. She was always so kind and considerate. "I understand," she said. "I'll leave you alone for the rest of the night. How about?" "Thanks," I said, going to my room. I thought about that encounter for a long time afterwards. We didn't transform each other as much for a while, a combination of not being alone together, and we needed a break after the subway bride incident. Things were changing for us, and I only noticed the changes when they were pointed out to me, usually by Satori. Like one day, I was preparing myself for school, and Satori banged on the bathroom door. "You've been in there for over an hour," she said. I was shocked when I discovered that she was right. Normally I didn't shave, as if trying to tempt my facial hair to grow out more, but when Satori pointed out my long use of the washroom, I was suddenly aware of the fact that I had been taking extra care to groom myself for a while. It wasn't just that one day. And then there was the time she came into my room so that I could transform her so that she could go play basketball. After transforming me, she commented on my clean room. I stared around and noticed that she was right. Everything was in its place, the laundry folded, dirty was in the hamper, my bed was made. Normally I was a right slob, as a lot of teenage boys are. But the thought of my room being as messy as it usually was grossed me out now. The biggest change was my sensitivity. I found Satori's jokes a lot funnier now than I used to, and I couldn't help but giggle when she pulled them. On the other hand, I was prone to tear up when she hurt my feelings, not that it happened often, but sometimes she did it without meaning to. "You're getting really sensitive these days, Ayumi," she pointed out. Her words nearly brought me to tears again. My parents even noticed it, or at least I thought they did. I was closer to my father than my mother, but lately Mom had been going out of her way to be around me and offer me advice. Dad seemed to be doing the same thing with Satori. It was a weird time for us. The lack of transforming had kind of distanced Satori and I, however, and I found that the longer we went without doing it, the worse I felt. I actually missed the time we would spend together. As much as I had hated it when we had started doing it, it had grown on me and made me see Satori in a whole new light. 2 months after the bride and groom incident, I finally approached Satori. My eyes were set as I went up the stairs to her room. Mom and Dad were working, and Satori had finished her chores for the day. As I walked into the room, a brilliant idea occurred to me. "Hey Ayumi," she said pleasantly. "What's up?" "I just had an idea," I replied. I pointed at her and suddenly she began transforming. It was the first time I'd ever done it without warning, and so she was shocked as her body turned into its boy self. She was wearing a white outfit with very thin shoes, the shirt of which had a very lovely design on it. "What's this?" she asked as she picked at the outfit. "It's a men's ballet outfit," I replied. "I know you like to dance. I figured with the autopilot that we get, it'd be fun to turn you into a professional dancer. I just wish I could have turned you into a girl ballet dancer, but..." "Good idea," she said, pointing at me the way I had just done to her. I felt myself shrink down, and though it had happened more than 100 times, it had been a while since the last time and it felt very strange. "Whoa, what?" I asked, looking at my body. It was the normal form that she usually gave me. The normal forms, we assumed, were what we would have looked like if we had been born the opposite sex. I was still wearing my male clothing. "Well, you can't just have a male ballet dancer," Satori said as she flicked her fingers. I felt my pants change into tights, and a very frilly pair of panties appeared over them. A thin pair of pink slippers appeared on my feet. "He needs a partner." My shirt sleeves disappeared, and my shirt fused with what I had originally assumed was underwear, making a frilly white leotard. She opened her pointed hand and I felt a weird feeling as the frilliest tutu I had ever seen expanded across my waist. It was huge and stuck straight out. Finally, my hair was done up much like it was when I was a bride, and I felt makeup once again applied to my face, as well as a soft headdress crowning my head. I stared at Satori, and my heart was beating so hard. I was worried as I felt all of the feelings that had flooded me when she was my groom resurface, even stronger now than they were before. Was my girl self in love with Satori's boy self? I thought it must be so. I realized that I was standing on tiptoe, in a perfect stance. "You're beautiful, Ayumi," Satori said, as she advanced towards me. I felt a twinge of fear, worrying that I would get lost in my feminine emotions. She stopped, took a stance and held out her hand in a graceful manner. I leapt towards her, and our autopilots took off as we began an exquisite dance across her bedroom. And as we started, I let my fears drift away as I landed, one hand in hers, her other arm around my waist. She twirled me around the room, lifting me up, and we were almost like one being. I found myself lost in her arms, to her strength. In the occasion that our eyes did meet, I found myself drowning in hers. I did love Satori, I thought. And as we danced, I became less afraid of that fact. My girl self had hopelessly fallen for Satori's boy self, and by the time we finished the dance, I didn't mind it anymore. It felt so natural to be in her strong arms. So natural to be held by her. Even as a girl, she had always protected me, made me feel safe, and I loved her for it. We finished dancing, but I couldn't force myself to pull away from her grip. I didn't want to. Instead, I leaned into her. She descended her head to mine, and we were locked in a passionate kiss. I felt the same static shock that occurred the last time we did, and the intensity of our act increased as I felt even more strongly that this was how it was supposed to be. We finally broke apart, but unlike last time, I didn't pull away from her. "Should we change back?" Satori asked. "No," I whispered, resting my head against her chest. "Oh," Satori said, tightening her grip around my waist, "okay." I stammered. I felt so strongly about this that I felt I had to tell her, but I was worried about how she would feel. "I love you, Satori." "I love you too, Ayumi," Satori replied. "I have for a long time." "I know," I said, "but the problem is, I think I only really feel this way when you're a boy, and I'm a girl." "That's exactly what it is," Satori said, matter-of-factly. Huh? I asked, looking up at her. I think it's safe to tell you now, Satori said. I was about to ask her what, when suddenly her bedroom door opened and Mom and Dad walked in. I was terrified. They wouldn't even be able to recognize us the way we were, let alone how shocking it must be to see two strangers dressed up for ballet in their daughter's bedroom. But then I got the shock of my life. Ayumi, you look so beautiful. My mother exclaimed as she ran up to me and hugged me. You know it's me? I asked, dumbfounded. Of course we do, Ayumi, Dad replied with a grin. We've known for months about your abilities. Satori told us. You told them? I asked Satori. She nodded happily. I rounded on Mom and Dad, and you weren't a little surprised that your children could do this? Well, we were surprised about Satori, but not you, my mother replied. My family is cursed, she explained. When we find true love, both ourselves and our soulmates switch genders. It starts off voluntarily on both sides. It's how you find your true love. You're able to change each other, and your alternate self, in your case, your female self, will slowly fall in love with your soulmate's alternate self. In this case, Satori's male self. This same thing happened to your father and I before you were born. What? I screamed, you were a guy? And I was a girl, my dad replied. But, Satori, I rounded on her, you knew this the whole time? No, Satori said, only for the last couple of months. We hadn't been talking the way we used to, and I was worried about you. So I told Mom and Dad about our abilities. They told me the whole story. You don't think it's weird that my true love is my sister? I asked my parents. Well, she's your stepsister, my father said. If she had been your biological sister, then yes, that would be cause for alarm. But now, I suppose she's your stepbrother, Mom replied. What do you mean? I asked. When both parties share true love's first kiss, and admit their love for each other, the curse completes itself. You are now a girl. But Satori can change me back. I started, but Dad held up his hand and quieted me. She can't anymore, and you can't change her, he said. The curse has ended, you guys are the way you are now. I looked at Satori and tried to make her turn back to normal, but she remained the handsome young man in the ballet costume. I tried harder, and it was a visible effort as I scrunched up my eyes. No, I said, fear in my voice. Am I really stuck like this? It's okay, Satori said, walking up to me and grabbing me by the waist. I clutched her arm for support, which I instantly felt throughout my whole body. Just having her hold me helped me think clearer. You knew this would happen, and you didn't stop me? I asked her, not accusingly though. I loved you long before the curse started, she said. I wanted us to be together, even if it meant being a guy to do it. It was Satori's love for you that started the curse in the first place, my mom replied. I stared at Satori, and instantly forgave her. If I am to be stuck like this, at least it's with him, I thought, as I rested my head against his shoulder. I realized that I couldn't think of Satori as a girl anymore. I could remember that he was one, but now looking at him, I didn't think of him as my stepsister, but rather my stepbrother and boyfriend. The last part of the change is the change of reality, my mother said. The only people who will ever remember who you used to be are the people in this room. Everyone else, such as your friends at school, will think that you've always been a girl. I looked up into Satori's eyes and felt content. That's okay, I said to my mother, without looking away from Satori. 18 years later, Satori and I watched our daughter. If there was anything that I regretted about being a woman, it was childbirth. That had been a nightmare. I seemed to inherit my mother's problem with giving birth and had to get a vasectomy after Ariel had been born. I actually assume that it's the last part of the curse, so you don't spread it as much. My mom had been an only child, as had her father, who had the curse, and his grandfather and his grandmother. Ariel was beautiful. She looked just like Satori did as a girl. It was funny how I could remember that after so long. She had come home from her third day of junior year with a terrified look on her face, and she was wearing a boy's sneakers. Satori and I didn't say anything about it to her, but we shared a private laugh later after Ariel had gone to bed.